YouTubers, this is IMAXNation1980 here, and I've got a record update for you. We're going to look at a few Beach Boys albums first, actually, because I'm currently on a quest to complete my Beach Boys studio album collection. Sort of. There are some Beach Boys studio albums that I don't really want for my collection, but I want to get all the good ones, all the ones from the, what I like to call the Platinum era, which goes from 1965 to 1973. And to start off, we have a record from that very stretch. This is Friends, one of the great post-Pet Sounds, post-Smile albums that unfortunately got ignored upon its release in 1968 in the United States, but caught on overseas. Friends is a very minimalistic album. It's very stripped down, very raw sounding. It's not dissimilar to Smiley Smile and Wild Honey before it. This album is a little more peaceful than those two. Smiley Smile was more of a psychedelic, kind of weirdo home demo album, and Wild Honey was more raucous and a little more energetic. This one's very, very laid back, very mellow, and the songs celebrate peace, family, the mundane things. It didn't fit in with the times. It was a far cry from the turbulence and the music that was in response to everything that was going on at the time. It wasn't psychedelic, it wasn't political, it wasn't hard-hitting. It was a very tranquil call for peace in the middle of a battlefield. It seemed like it existed in an alternate universe altogether. Next up is 2020, the studio album that followed Friends. That was released in early 1969, and it's not as much of a complete studio album as Friends is, as it is made up of some leftovers and tracks from Smile, such as Cabanescence and Our Prayer. The reason why it's called 2020, well, it was their 20th album overall for Capitol, including compilations, and also because, well, let's take a look at the gatefold. And there are some leftovers that have been finished, like Time to Get Alone, which dates from the Wild Honey sessions. But there is plenty of new material here too, plus their hit mid-1968 single, Do It Again. Like Friends, this is a solid collection, but it's a lot more produced, it sounds a little more cohesive, but I think both albums are great in their own right. And as you can see, this is a Dutch pressing. Next up is the 1981 Beach Boys compilation, 10 Years of Harmony. 10 Years of Harmony chronicles the Beach Boys' brother years. The Beach Boys officially launched Brother Records in 1970 when they had signed on with Warner Brothers Reprise Records. Now, they had planned to launch Brother Records before that, ultimately using the label for Smiley Smile, but future Capitol albums would just have the Capitol label. But Brother Records was finally here to stay after signing with Warner Brothers, and it was first used for the album Sunflower. Now, their contract with Warner Brothers ended in 1978, but they still used the Brother moniker when moving on to Cbs Caribou Records. This album was released after the Beach Boys' second Cbs Caribou release, Keeping the Summer Alive. It has tracks from Sunflower, Surf's Up, Carl and the Passion So Tough, Holland, In Concert, 15 Big Ones, Love You, MIU album, LA Light album, and Keeping the Summer Alive. So it spans the entire decade, and it even includes some rarities and some outtakes, such as the Sunflower outtake San Miguel, and the 15 Big Ones outtake Sea Cruise. It also includes a track from Dennis Wilson's 1977 solo album, Pacific Ocean Blue, the song being River Song. The album uses the single mixes of Rock and Roll Music, California, and School Days, as well as the single edit of Cool Cool Water. Perhaps the only problem with this album is that it doesn't have too many Love You tracks on it, and Love You is arguably the best Beach Boys album made after 1973. 1973, I think, was the final year that the Beach Boys were at the top of their game, but Love You is an exception. But unfortunately, only one song from Love You is on here. There are two songs from Keeping the Summer Alive. I would have cut those two off and put more Love You songs on there, because Keeping the Summer Alive is not, well, it's not a good album. And a lot of Beach Boys fans agree that it's a low point for the band. But because it was their most recent album, I get the sense that they had to represent it somehow. Another one of the outtakes on here is It's a Beautiful Day, which was from the movie Americathon. And that's a great forgotten little gem, and it's a cool thing that they included the single version of that song on here. Quite frankly, it should have been put on the Keepin' the Summer Alive album. It would have been the standout track on that. Moving on, this is the Beach Boys' Rarities. This was released in 1983 by Capitol Records, but withdrawn quickly afterwards, so it's very, very hard to find. Ironically, it is a rarity itself, and it was only released on CD once in Japan, and that CD is super hard to find. Rarities has some stuff that would later be released as bonus tracks or on other sets, but at the time this was a nice little helping of treasure for Beach Boys fans, and included are some songs that would never be released again, such as the studio overdubbed version of The Letter, and a Wild Honey era cover of the Beatles with a little help from my friends. It also, speaking of Wild Honey, includes an extended version of I Was Made to Love Her. It has a mix of Bluebirds Over the Mountain that was accidentally sent to the Netherlands. Rarities also includes a song that was left off of the band's debut album, Land Ahoy. An alternate version of Good Vibrations is present here, one of many looks at the sessions for that Pocket Symphony. Also on here is the single version of Cotton Fields. The 2020 version of Cotton Fields was a more Baroque pop-esque arrangement, whereas the single version was more country rockin', and that was a huge hit in Europe. It didn't do much of a thing in the US, which was the usual for the Beach Boys by 1970, the year it was released. Also, a German version of In My Room is included. Auld Lang Syne is presented without Dennis's voiceover. The Lord's Prayer is presented in stereo, and that was a B-side, so that was a little hard to find for quite some time. Celebrate the News, the B-side of the Great Breakaway single, is a very nice addition as well. You're Welcome is from the Smile Sessions, and that was the B-side of Heroes and Villains in 1967. And lastly, a really cool live version of All I Want to Do, which is from a London concert that occurred a few days after the one that was used for the Live in London album. Alright, so now moving on from the Beach Boys, The Beatles, featuring Tony Sheridan, In the Beginning. But that subtitle is wrong. Most of, if not all, the recordings on this album are from 1961, from the Beatles' Hamburg days, and there are many featuring Tony Sheridan himself. 3 of these recordings made it onto Beatles Anthology 1. Those would be My Bonnie, Ain't She Sweet, and Cry for a Shadow. But the other of the era gems on here are Worth a Hear, and it's pretty competent, energetic rock and roll. Next up we have Golden Earring's Moontan. This was the album that sort of broke them into international fame. Golden Earring is a Dutch band. This album spawned a huge hit single called Radar Love. The album was released in 1973, but Radar Love isn't the only awesome song on this album. This whole album is actually really good. Now, this is actually the second version of the album. The original version was released in the Netherlands, the band's home country, and continental Europe. But MCA, through their track record moniker, released an alternate version of the album in the United States and the UK, to my understanding. This version removed 2 tracks from the original Dutch and continental Europe version, just like Vince Taylor and Susie Lunacy, and replaced them with a big 8-minute epic called Big Tree Bluesy, which was actually a remake of a song from their self-titled 1970 album. And while I do like the 2 songs that they cut, I really do like Big Tree Bluesy. I think it fits in nicely with all the big 6 to 9 minute epics on here. It has a slight progressive rock tone to it. It's a little spacey, it rocks hard. It's a fun experience listening to all the way through, no matter which version you're listening to. The sequencing is a little weird on this version of the album. I kind of prefer the Dutch sequencing better because I think the Vanilla Queen works better as a closing track, but at the same time, I really do love Big Tree Bluesy. Luckily, we'd get Just Like Vince Taylor as the B-side of Radar Love. But Susie Lunacy, we didn't get that, unless we got it on a live album. I don't know too much about Golden Earring, but all I know is Moontan, spectacular album. And when the album was released in the United States, this album cover was pulled and replaced with this very bland looking cover right here. And lastly, Jeff Beck's Truth. Though really, this is from the Jeff Beck group, not just Jeff Beck himself. Jeff Beck plays guitar, while Rod Stewart handles the vocals, Ron Wood is on bass, Mick Waller is on drums. But no matter, it's a fantastic debut album for the former Yardbird. And this album was released a few months before another Yardbird launched his new band's new album, Led Zeppelin. That Yardbird was Jimmy Page. Jeff Beck's Truth often gets compared to Led Zeppelin 1, but comparisons aside, this is an excellent mix of hard-hitting rock, really layered in very sincere blues. A real edge. There's some psychedelia here and there, but it's mostly a blues-flavored hard rock record, and it hits. It's very punchy, it's edgy, every minute of it rocks. Every minute of it is a joy. And it even includes an earlier Jeff Beck recording, one that he did with Page, and a few others, such as Keith Moon of The Who, in a proposed supergroup that didn't make it past that first session. The name of that track is Beck's Bolero. So, there you have it. My new records. This is IMAX Nation 1980, signing off.